have my camera balanced very precariously on a big pile of books and it will not stop wobbling, so apologies in advance. Hello, welcome back. Today's 5-minute review is Salvation by Raena Rood. So Salvation is the final novel in the Subversive trilogy. So the first one, Subversive, I reviewed on my blog last year. The second one, Sanctuary, I reviewed not that long ago, a couple of months ago, on YouTube itself. I'll post a link up above. And the final one, Subversive, comes out today, the 1st of December, when I am hopefully posting this. If I can get my act together. I was sent a copy about a month ago. The author very kindly reached out. She'd seen my previous reviews, and she very kindly reached out to offer me a copy. It hadn't been through the final edit yet, so there were a couple, like inconsistencies and stuff, but I'll breeze past those because it wasn't edited, and obviously that wouldn't be the final version. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I don't know what I'm doing on my head. Absolutely loved it. Couldn't get enough of it. I'm kind of glad there's only 3 books, to be honest. Just before we go ahead, this video will now contain spoilers for all 3 of the Subversive books. So fair warning for that if you haven't read them yet. I'll try not to spoil anything specific, but overt themes, obviously, because this is the 3rd in the trilogy. I will have to spoil the first 2 books, I guess, to a certain degree, in order to explain what's happening and why it's good. But as a brief description, the Subversive trilogy imagines a world in which Christianity is outlawed, with the government actively detaining and attempting to rehabilitate practicing Christians. There are a lot of pop culture references. It's a very modern world. It's very, very, very similar to our own, which can be quite jarring at times. But I loved that in the first 2 books, how jarring it was with the differences. But yeah, it's set in a modern day world, basically. Our main character is Gemma, a woman living in an underground Christian community. Her parents were detained and her community turned against her, so she went underground to live with this sort of commune. The series follows her relationship with Taylor, her childhood crush turned task force member, after he helps her escape detainment in the first book. As the relationship kind of develops, the sort of trials that they go through results in Gemma kind of ending up as a very reluctant face of a rebellion, and therefore she gets her sort of fair share of enemies along the way. And at the end of the second book, Gemma kind of took, if you watch my review, you'll know that I mentioned that instead of being on this kind of defensive front as they had been for the majority of the second book and all of the first book, Gemma kind of takes up a notch and takes it to the offense instead of the defense, which is exactly how I would want a dystopian trilogy to go, to be honest. So she's now the face of the rebellion. Salvation is a perfect, thrilling end to this series. The things I loved about the first 2 books, so Gemma's focus on kindness and non-violence as main solutions to things instead of fighting her way out. Her relationship with Taylor, the modern day setting, the exaggerated nature of the villains, all of it was just absolutely cranked up a notch. It was incredible. Gemma's reluctance and initial actual ignorance of her stance as a rebellion figurehead was a really intriguing position that I hadn't really seen before. I couldn't help but compare it to the Hunger Games with Katniss Everdeen, but unlike Katniss, I thought Gemma's reaction to her new position and the way that the media were framing her was incredibly human. I mean, obviously there are fundamental differences between the Hunger Games and Subversive, but it was the thing that I kind of compared it to the most, having the same sort of overall narrative kind of structure, I guess. Similar narrative structure overall. Most of Gemma's reactions to events in the novel, especially in the final act, were refreshingly human and spectacularly in character. She wasn't ever, striding into battle. She's just trying to save the people that she loves in any way that she can, even if it means sacrificing herself. And I think that's a really important character trait that may remain consistent the entire way through. Except on this point, of course, she is actively choosing to do these things rather than kind of being dragged into it reluctantly, as she was at the beginning of her arc. Her primary motivations being kindness and love, like her need to fill in for Letty in the bookshop in case other Christians appeared looking for shelter. Just that pure motivation was an absolute gorgeous change from the usual character traits that we see in dystopian novels. Talking about dystopian novels, any good dystopia needs two slightly contradictory things. So the first is an exaggerated, almost cartoonish kind of villain, and a world that's grounded in our own. The latter is really important because an effective dystopia would get underneath your skin. It's supposed to. That's what they're supposed to do. It makes you think about the consequences of current events, and how they could spiral out of control and end up in an absolutely horrific dystopian future. I mean, you have things like 1984, you have things like The Hunger Games, you have things like Brave New World. They're all they're all seeded back in the world that we already live in, and they're just an exaggerated look at what happens. They're like thought experiments, basically. But because literally, stripped to its core elements, dystopia is just a genre with an exaggerated extrapolation of current world events. That's all dystopia is. But a key part of this exaggeration is an over-the-top villain. So you have to take your villain and take them to extremes. The first two books in the Subversive trilogy had absolutely excellent villains. So you had Carver in the first book, who would do whatever it took to get the job done, no matter how bloody the end result. And then over the first two books, you also had Mullen, who was deranged and who became absolutely obsessed with Gemma. They were both brilliant examples of dystopian villains, but both of them were gone by the time that Sanctuary finished. And with both of them out of the picture, I was kind of keen to see what Salvation would produce, and I was delighted at the absolute extravagant narcissist Ogden and the cold, narcissistic even, Ogden, and the cold calculating Lydia Grimes behind him pulling all the strings. They were both brilliantly matched against Gemma, and they both had their flaws, and they both had, they were quite well rounded. They weren't totally one-dimensional, and I thought they were absolutely brilliant antagonists. So Salvation offers up some really kind of strong themes to think about. The biggest example in this one is forgiveness. Because this is one of the core beliefs of Christianity, there are several moments in the novel where characters kind of question whether or not they're prepared to forgive someone, and in a couple of instances this leads to them pondering their faith. And I love moments like this in books with really strong religious themes. I don't think it's mentioned enough. I think presenting faith as totally unwavering and static is so boring. It's the most boring thing you can do with a character, because humans do doubt ourselves, and we do, we go through periods where we're not entirely sure of ourselves. And presenting that in regards to religious characters always helps to ground them in reality and to make them more realistic and more well-rounded. I love that Gemma had moments where she questioned her faith, and I love that at the end of that, she came out with a stronger belief. And I have to say, without spoiling anything, chapters 26 and 27, not where I thought that the plot was going to go and where Gemma and Taylor's relationship was going to go, but I'm so glad they went there. It was the best thing that I think I've ever read, ever. However, in terms of themes and allegories, I did think that occasionally they were a little heavy-handed and probably could have been kind of dropped back a bit to let the reader kind of have a chance to figure them out on their own. But this had absolutely no impact on my enjoyment of the novel at all. So Salvation may be the story of a dystopia, but it's also primarily the story of a relationship, and one of the best things that I thought about this book was the ending, and I think it's a perfect note to end this review on, because it just sums up the series as a whole. Ending the book with the stabilization of Gemma's relationship with Taylor rather than the end of the dystopian world that they live in is such a brilliant conclusion to the series as a whole, and an excellent ending to the novel. And it's quite refreshing, because normally, again, you talk The Hunger Games, it starts with a focus on Katniss's relationships with I can't remember whoever Liam Hemsworth plays in the film, and Peeta, and then you have at the end in the final book it kind of switches and it focuses more on the dystopia and on the world and the system that they have, and bringing that down, and so remaining focused on Gemma and Taylor's relationship the entire way through. It felt quite refreshing. It felt quite new. I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. And as a whole, I absolutely cannot recommend this series enough, and I'm very excited to find out what Raena Rood writes next, because I'll read whatever it is willingly, happily. Thank you for watching this review. It's not quite 5 minutes. I think it's going to be a lot longer than 5 minutes. But I do have a playlist with other 5-minute reviews, and you can check them out in the card above. I'll post a wee link. You can check out my other reviews for Subversive and Sanctuary. I'll pop them down in the description below. Yeah, if you'd like to check out my other videos, if you'd like to give us a wee thumbs up, maybe hit that subscribe button, I would really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.